And welcome back. In the last video segment, you saw us disassemble the cylinder heads, and then we started to put them inside this mixing tray to soak them down with some WD-40. And what you're seeing here is the difference between the two after about 24, a little over 24 hours of just soaking them in WD-40, and then taking just one of these red Scotch-Brite pads you see here, putting it on the cylinder surface again while everything's still nice and saturated. And this is before we even get to the solvent part of our cleaning process to help more with our carbon and such, and just kind of keeping a nice flat even pressure and working the entire pad side to side and making sure not to concentrate on a particular area. And after just a couple of minutes, as you can see here, you can see the difference between the two cylinder heads. So this is as they were when they were just soaking, with nothing's been done to the surface. And this one is just after a couple of minutes, again, of just going over with a piece of red Scotch-Brite. And you can kind of see that WD-40 is pulled to the bottom of our container here. And all I'm doing is just kind of soaking this pad into that oil and just kind of, again, letting it continue to saturate the surface and kind of go over it, and using the oil as a little bit of a kind of like a, I don't want to say a sanding compound, but just, again, more of like a lubricant. So this being, as you can see here, printed very fine as far as the Scotch-Brite. And and I saw another gentleman on another channel do this as well. And this is how he finishes up his cylinder heads. He starts with the Wizzy wheels, but he uses the white Wizzy wheel. And if you watch his video, he has 3 different colors of them, and the white being the most fine. He'll use that to get all the gasket material off, and then he'll just use red Scotch-Brite by itself to kind of polish it up. So what I wanted to do, as you can see here, is just try and experiment. And once we get everything soft, leave the pad soaked, and then use this pad soaked in the WD-40 and go over it and see how much of this residue we can get off. And if you look at your cylinder heads here, you can see kind of where your sealing surface was at with your old gasket. So I'm not looking to get this thing, completely clean, completely mirror finish. Just looking to get the big chunks off and getting the rest of the old sealant off. Because of now, depending on how your heads are, now these heads are aluminum, which is why we want to be really, really careful with them, especially making sure, regardless of the type of grit that we're using, that we don't concentrate and get into one area and really start scrubbing away at it, because we can remove enough material to cause ourselves a divot. So in the description, I'll link his video where he kind of goes over his steps of how he conditions his heads. And I'll also put another link to another gentleman from another channel called Reignited, which I've referenced in the past. Now, he is a Mopar technician. And back when Mopar had some recalls going on that required a lot of the technicians to remove the head, which meant cleaning them up, putting new head gaskets on, he'll go over what they were instructed to do, or how they did it, using factory instructions to get the head prepped in order to put another gasket on it. So what I'm going to do is, just to show you a little bit of this here, again, I'm just going to kind of soak my pad down here and kind of the runoff a little bit of all this WD-40. And drizzle some over the head, kind of like you're basting a turkey, or you got something in the oven like a roast or something along that nature. Sorry, I don't know what the vegetarian equivalent of that would be, otherwise I'd mention it. Okay, and again, just using the entire hand, keeping it flat towards the surface, and just lightly going over the top of this. And you can see it does a pretty good job, even though it's just very fine. You can see after just a few minutes of that, it does a nice job of getting those nice chunks off. And a lot of that's just due because of the fact that we have let these soak for a few days and allowed that WD-40 to come in here and soften up a lot of the old residue and carbon and things of that nature. Now, one thing that you can do, and I did a little bit on this cylinder head as well, I'll go get a blade and show you, is that you can get a little bit of a scraper, but you want to be careful with the scraper. You don't want to tilt it up on its edge and cut a groove, but you can keep a scraper pretty flat and come through here and scrape off these big pieces of carbon that kind of looks like little horseshoes on the sides of these combustion chambers. So let me go get a razor blade and I'll show you that real quick. One moment. And welcome back. So what I'm using here is just a flat razor. Again, I just want to be careful with this. I'm just going to dip this in oil real quick just to coat it. And all I'm going to do is keep this as flat as possible up against the cylinder head when I do this, because again, I don't want to have it tilted up on edge like this and gouge into it, but just really carefully just use it like that to kind of scrape off like this really big chunky stuff. And hopefully you can kind of see that. You can see what's accumulating on that blade and coming off. So we can kind of do that to take care of this big chunky stuff. Or if you feel uncomfortable in doing that, you can just continue using, like I said, the Scotch-Brite or your method of choice, and just continue to go work yourselves over the cylinder heads until you get the bulk of this off. Again, what I'm looking at doing is just getting the bigger stuff off that goes around what the head gasket would seal, and you can, again, especially see on the old one where all your gaskets were at, like around your oil passages and your water passages and around your head here. So this is, like I said, this is looking really good, and this is just the WD-40 and a little bit of Scotch-Brite. We'll do the same thing over here, and then once we've gotten this one to kind of look like this one, where you see just the bigger stuff here at the end, and you can see a lot of this has actually dissolved itself because it sat overnight after we scrubbed it a little bit. But once we get it down to kind of looking as clean as this one does, then we'll take them out of this tub and I'll bring you back outside, and then we'll start using the solvent I was telling you about earlier, the True Fuel, which is literally just gasoline. It's 92 octane gasoline, but it doesn't have ethanol in it. It doesn't have all the additives in it that normal pump fuel would have in it. So I'll show you all that here in a bit. And in case you're curious, I am using chemical resistant gloves, not for this part just because this WD-40 has nothing to do with it, but eventually once we get this thing moved over to the solvent side of the cleaning, and I just wanted something a little bit better on my hands than standard gloves, just so I don't dry my hands out and or do any other potential damage. In case you're curious, I did pick these up at Lowe's. You can see they're called Venom Steel. They're rip resistant industrial gloves, and they're also chemical resistant as well. So it's a heavy duty 2-layer glove that we'll be using for this process. So I'm going to continue to kind of scrape this one or scrub this one down a little bit with that Scotch-Brite you saw earlier. I'm going to work on this, and then I'll bring you back for the next piece. One moment. And welcome back. So I decided that I'd zoom you in a little bit on a section of that cylinder head. And forgive me if my voice gets a little bit low in this process. Gonna switch out to another pair of gloves. I might want to adjust the camera settings with a pair of oily gloves. And what I'm going to show you here is that you can see this darker color carbon type buildup around that combustion chamber. What I want to do is scrub at that a little bit. So again, just take this red Scotch-Brite I was telling you about. I'm just soaking it in some WD-40 here. And just going to go over the surface of this Again, keeping it even, keeping it moving, not concentrating really on any particular area. And you can already see how much of that it was able to remove. Now, this Scotch-Brite, although it is very fine Scotch-Brite, it will leave an abrasive residue behind like any other Scotch-Brite and or light sanding would do. Of course, that's the reason why we're going to go over it with a solvent and continue our cleaning process. And as you'll see, the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to just thoroughly clean everything up with a final rinse, brake clean, to make sure that obviously that we've removed all the grit from our pads and excess oils and things of that nature. And you can see right there that final, it's almost gone. That little bit of combustion chamber. See this little piece right here. You see it lifts up relatively easy. If you feel like the Scotch-Brite's getting dry, you can always spray the Scotch-Brite down with a fresh spray of WD-40, or just reach down and grab some drippings out of your tray here. Again, I've seen individuals use the Scotch-Brite on these aluminum cylinder heads just dry after they've got the bulk of the cleaning done. And these Scotch-Brites, these red ones, seem to do a really good job of polishing up the aluminum and removing any very light surface level scratches from the first implement they would use. Which again, the individual I've seen did not quite this process, but what they will do is that they came over it with a white whiz wheel. Again, the very fine whiz wheel, very high RPM, no pressure. One over it to get all the surface level thicker chunks of gasket and such off, and then when the cylinder head was done and dry, they just went over it with a piece of dry Scotch-Brite, and just like it is, using it with, you know, keeping surface contact on it, not concentrating an area, and just use this red Scotch-Brite as kind of a final prep to polish it. And you'll see that in the video of his that I link in the description, when he's kind of explaining the process that he's used on his aluminum style cylinder heads for years. So without boring you and making you kind of see all that, you can kind of see the process of that. I'm going to do that for a little bit while longer on this head, do a little bit more on the other head, and then we'll get them prepped to take them out and start on the next phase of this. So I'll bring you right back. And welcome back. So we've got the majority of the old sealant and carbon and other types of dirt off of our mating surface. As you can see there, you can see all the crap dripping down off of it. So what I'm doing next is I'm just using what's left of this red Scotch-Brite after getting the majority of the sealing stuff off, and just using it to take the WD-40 and just douse the accumulation of oil and muck and everything that was on the outside of this one cylinder head. This is I believe this one was the driver's side, so it was susceptible to, when you're doing your oil changes, of, you know, excess oil being dropped onto the cylinder head and just kind of caking up on this side of it just over time and accumulating dirt and turning into sludge. And so what I'm doing is making sure that I don't take the cylinder head surface and tip it forward and get it into the soup below. I'm also not going to use this one to do any more work on the face of that mounting surface, because again, we're just using it to come through here, and just like you see here, just soaking down the residual gunk on the outside of the cylinder head, so that way when we hit it with our solvent, which, let me show you, this is what I was talking about earlier. That's the True Fuel solvent. It's not the cheapest thing in the world to buy, but it's probably cheaper than what the equivalent of that would be to you know, to get a hold of some type of equivalent engine cleaner. And when we get over to doing this piece of it, we'll obviously switch to a new piece of again, the red Scotch-Brite, and then that's when we'll start to kind of rinse everything down and concentrate more on getting the carbon out of the ports and such. But what I want to do is just continue to kind of soak down the mud and the gunk that's on the side of this one cylinder head. Again, I think a lot of this is just due to, you know, having oil spilt on this side of the head because of where the oil fill was at, you know, over, you know, 10 plus years, and then it accumulate in dirt from there. So I'm going to concentrate on more on just getting kind of this, all this dirt and grease and grime broken up, and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our first cylinder head in here, and we've just doused it down a little bit with the True Fuel just to help kind of rinse things up a little bit and kind of see what we've got left. So you can see we've got a couple areas. Now some of these areas are going to be staining, and they're not going to come up. Like maybe this area right here looks a little bit dark, looks like a little bit of sealant to remove in here. But remember, I'm really just wanting to concentrate on what is actually going to be a sealing surface. So the majority of this looks really good. So what I want to continue to do is just, I'm going to get a new piece of Scotch-Brite, as we were talking about before, soak it down with a little bit of True Fuel, and then just continue to kind of work over this head. Again, just kind of trying to clean up the little bit that remains from when we used the WD-40. And then we're going to continue to work on items like this. You can see, just like I was talking about earlier, we used the WD-40 to help loosen up all the gunk that was on this side of the cylinder head, and it did get the majority of it off. There's just little corner pockets of it like that still need to come out. Again, I'm not looking to get it, you know, showroom perfect, just looking to get it a little bit better than what it was on the exterior, and of course, you know, definitely get our gasket surfaces cleaned up here. So I'm going to concentrate on this, and then once this is done, we'll dump this out. We'll rinse this container out before we bring the next cylinder head over. And again, I'm not going to film it because you're not going to miss much, but it's going to be the same process that we did with the WD-40. I'm just going to put a little bit of our cleaner on there, a little bit of our solvent, and just continue to work over the top of this head, seeing what I can get out of here. And again, now some of this is staining, which means it's not going to come out, and we don't necessarily need it to come out. And some of this is pitting. As you can see, it's just a normal electrolysis that takes place because you've got a coolant in here that's also surrounded by an electrical current, aka when the engine's in motion. And some of this pitting around these water jackets is completely normal. You're not going to get it to come out. It'll still seal, it'll seal fine, and if you were to dig into the metal deep enough to get that to come out, then you would create a divot in that area. You know, the only real way to get that to come out and then still continue to have a nice, smooth, even sealing surface would be if you were to take the heads to the machine shop and just have them basically deck or resurface the entire head by taking, you know, X number of thousands of inches off, whatever they need to do, if you got enough meat left on the bone to do that. But that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to again concentrate on the, just as we did with the WD-40, except we're just going to be using, you know, True Fuel to help get off the remnants of what's left of the old gasket, and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. I apologize for the outside noise. In case I didn't mention it earlier, in the first clip we have moved to the outside to be in a nice well ventilated area to use our solvent. So you can see here that we've got this area, mating surface, pretty well cleaned up at this point. There are some areas you can see here, they're kind of outside the sealing area, and some of these areas in here are just more staining than it is everything else, but we've got the important areas taken care of on this particular head as far as what's, you know, what the sealing areas are going to be. And as you can see, it's a far cry better than what it was. So we're just concentrating right now on the outside of it, trying to knock off as much as the mud and crud and debris as we can. And as you can tell from and we did change our Scotch-Brite, You can see the color of that solvent now coming off there. You can see all that gunk coming along with it. So what we're going to do is got a couple more areas on this head that we want to continue to kind of focus on a little bit. And then we're going to switch this out and do the same thing to our other head. And then when we're ready to kind of give everything the nice brake clean rinse, I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got our first cylinder head just kind of over there on a tray, drying at this point. We did give it a final rinse again of using our solvent. We haven't done the final brake clean rinse yet, but that's coming. We're gonna get started on our second cylinder head here. And normally what I like to do to these is switch out to a new piece of Scotch-Brite, which we have here, again sticking with the red. And what we're gonna do is just kind of douse this thing in a little bit in our solvent. Start to rinse off the WD-40 that's on here, along with the grit from the old WD-40, and then we'll start concentrating on getting the mating surface cleaned up. Once that's done, then we'll move over to concentrating on the other mating surfaces, such as the intake and the exhaust. And then finally we'll concentrate on seeing how much grit we can kind of get out of the side impressions of the cylinder head. Again, not looking to try to make them showroom new, but are try to make them look at least a little bit better than what they do now. So I'm going to get started on this. And again, like I said before, you're not missing anything as to why I'm not filming it. It's the same process as the WD-40. We're going to saturate the head down with our solvent, saturate our pad down with our solvent, just keep nice even pressure with our hand, and just concentrate on the whole area, trying not to concentrate on a single area and go, you know, if you do that, then you could potentially cause some issues. So I'm gonna get started on this and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So I'm gonna try not to get my hand in the shop. I just want to show you what I'm doing again. Now, as you're kind of going over this surface, what you can do, what I like to do is, since we're inside this mixing tray and a lot of our solvent kind of collects at the bottom, is just to use our Scotch-Brite pad like this, soak up a bunch of our solvent, and again, just keeping it nice and wet, and just continuing to go over the surface of this. Now, as you're going over this and you're kind of getting it where it needs to be, if you see an area like right here, you're probably not going to be able to see that on the camera because it's pretty small. It's actually kind of hard for me to see. You can take your Scotch-Brite and just come to this one area and just go over this area. Again, going over the whole area at one time, but concentrating a little bit more on this area, but not on a particular spot, but again, just keeping hand pressure on here. And that little area that I was wanting to clean up is now gone. Had a little piece of that black sealant that was still in that one corner of that combustion chamber that I was looking to get rid of. And just kind of looking over our head here, that is a bit of staining. That part's fine. Looks like we got another little bit of material right here. Again, I'm just going to go over this area, but again, I'm going to not concentrate on that particular dot, but just go over the whole thing, a section at a time. If my pad gets dry, soak up more of our solvent. And again, I've seen individuals use the red Scotch-Brite pads dry on these type of cylinder heads before. Again, just using light pressure and they were fine. I figured just keeping them wet just gives us that much of helps make the cleaning easier, gives us that much more protection. So that little area that I was concentrating on here had a little black dot that has now been taken care of. And anything that's actually outside of the sealing area, and again, you can kind of see it if you look at the old gasket, and even with these being cleaned up, you can kind of see the staining of where the gasket was sitting. So if it's something that's kind of outside of an area that needs to be sealed, I'm not as concerned with it because it's not necessarily going to cause us a problem. And I'm just concentrating on this little area right up here. These is where our lifters would normally, this area covers up your lifters, these four areas here, in case you're curious. Because these were your push rods. These little holes here at the top are where your push rods are going to come through. Actually, I should say they cover up the lifters, but your push rods will come through the cylinder head here in order to meet your push rod assemblies at the top that actually actuate your valves. So there you go. So you can see there I had a little area. Hopefully you saw a little area that was kind of a black. It was still over here, so I just kind of concentrated on a little bit. Again, not going too much more pressure than hand pressure. And let's see if I can get you in to where you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I apologize, but I've got to keep my hand on the cylinder head. I don't want it flopping forward. Yeah, you're not going to be able to see that. Let's see if I got one on this end. Kind of see what I'm doing here. So I got a little bit of an area like right here. So I'm just dipping my Scotch-Brite into more solution, and then I can kind of come in here like this and just kind of concentrate on that area there until I'm happy with it, which I just saw it disappear. So I'm happy with that, and we're starting to get a nice polish on this particular cylinder head, which I'm liking. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think I'm happy with the mating surface now overall. There we go. A little area right there, a little area right there. So I'm just kind of going over it, and I'm not doing too much pressure at all, but just kind of concentrating on like wide areas that may contain a little bit of a blemish. Okay, so yeah, so that right there I'm happy with. So what we're going to do now that we're kind of done with the mating surface here on this is I'm just going to flip this to its side. Again, I'm going to keep mindful though that I don't want to take the mating surface and go flat down with it in this tray and have it sit in a bunch of crud, so to speak. But I am going to come through here on the sides now and just kind of concentrate on trying to get a lot of this loose dirt and grit out of here. So I'm going to concentrate on the mating surfaces for the intake and get the dirt off both sides of this, and then we'll come back and then we'll give everything a final rinse of brake clean and go from there. One moment. And welcome back. So before we give everything a final spray with usually brake parts cleaner is my cleaner of choice, is that you can't see them much on this intake because we just kind of scrub these out a little bit. I need to scrub them out a bit more. But on these intakes, at least on these heads, because of the crankcase ventilation system that takes vapors from the crankcase and puts it back into the intake, a lot of times these intakes will get clogged up full of basically gunk. So it'll be a mixture of like oil and fuel vapor, and it'll kind of clog up the sides of that. So we went through this. This is the last piece we touched, and you just used our red Scotch-Brite pad and went inside of all of our intakes here and did our best to try to clean out as much of the gunk as we could. And we do have a method, or a catch can, an oil catch can on delivery, so when we reassemble the motor, since this one will be supercharged, they kind of cut down on that intake accumulation. So I just wanted to show you that. So we're going to get ready to again finish cleaning out a little bit more of these intakes, and then we're going to give them a final spray down, a brake clean, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So I just want to kind of show you what I'm talking about on these intake ports. You can see we scrubbed that one down a little bit. You can see a little bit more metal hopefully in those two. But when you get down to the third one that we haven't touched yet, you can see it's a little bit more buildup on it. Like I said, these particular heads, it's not too bad as far as the buildup. We're not going to be able to get 100% of that out. It'd be better if we had like a hot tank or something to dump these into to really get them clean. But again, I'm not looking for 100% perfection on there. Just looking to get some of that debris out. So again, we're just going to continue to kind of work on that with our piece of Scotch-Brite, and you can see, yes, it is a toothbrush. Scotch-Brite and a little bit of toothbrush to scrape out most of what we can off these intake ports, and then we'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So just to show you, we've got our two cylinder heads here, just kind of propping up, letting them dry, and also dosing them down with a pretty liberal amount of brake clean to make sure that we've got all the debris and the little pieces of grit and such out of the areas that are important, which, you know, in this case would be a lot of the cylinder head. Now, they're not perfect, but as you can see, they're a far cry better than what they were. There's still some grit, some grime in the cracks and crevices. You can see our intakes there. Hopefully you can see those. They're not perfect, but they are a lot cleaner than they were. And right now we're just letting them air dry, letting the brake clean kind of do its thing. And of course, we're still outside while we're doing this. You want plenty of ventilation, especially around brake clean. It's quite a strong smell. Let's just put it that way. And I think we are good. And what we'll do is we'll probably dose these down a couple more times, and again let them dry, and then come over here with probably a nice soft cloth and just hand wipe them down as well. Now there'll need to be one more cleaning after we get done lapping them. We'll have to make sure that we do a really good job at just trying to get everything all cleaned up and ready to go, because you definitely don't want that grit compound to remain. So we'll have to be really careful when we're doing our lapping to make sure we clean up after ourselves. But like I said, I'm going to dose these down a couple more times, let them air dry as we're getting things cleaned up and packed up. Now, what I like to do with the old fuel that is left over from the cleaning process, which you can see a lot of it's right there inside of our mixing tray, which is why I like to use these mixing trays, is that we'll get this bottled back up, and there is a place that I can go to. It's provided by the city that takes old gasoline and other hazardous chemicals. So we'll just be able to turn this into them in order to get this properly disposed of. But like I said, hopefully that helps. I'll bring you back once all this is dry and we've got them inside the garage, because there's one more thing I like to do to these when they're in this state. But I'll bring you back in a bit. One moment. And welcome back. You can see we got our cylinder heads back inside of our mixing tray. Now we've cleaned the mixing tray out and thoroughly dried it, and you can see the result of our cleaning efforts thus far. So to recap, remember we started with the WD-40. They soaked in WD-40 for about 24 to 48. While everything was still soaked in WD-40, we took the red Scotch-Brite pads, went over the surface of everything to clean off as much of the old sealant and the old gasket material as we could. Once that was done, we took them outside and then used a little bit of our solvent, which again is the true fuel. It's the lawnmower, 4-cycle lawnmower gasoline. That doesn't have the ethanol and the other additives to it. I just like to use it because it's a little bit cleaner fuel. And then use that as a solvent again with the red Scotch-Brite pad, and went over all the surfaces to clean off the remaining gasket and the sealant material. So they sit as you see them now. Now they're not perfect, they're not 100%. There are some areas where you got some staining on the heads, but I'm not concerned with getting the staining off. And you've got some areas like right around the water jackets, they're a little bit dimpled. They got a little bit of electrolysis going, but again, no issue with that either. They should seal just fine. And like I said, I'll link 2 videos in the description below. One to Reignited, where you can see kind of how he resurfaces his heads per the manufacturer in order to reinstall onto an engine, and to another individual that also uses the red Scotch-Brite pads that we used in this video. Now the last thing I like to do, probably don't need to do this, but I like to do it, is that since these were exposed to a lot of solvents, just in order to protect our valve stem guides, as I usually like to just take a little bit of oiling can here, a little bit of engine oil, and just kind of shoot them down each one of the valve stem guides, just to kind of get them lubricated and make sure they stay protected, because they did have all that stripped away in the process of this. Now when we come back in the next video, what we will be doing is lapping our new valves into our existing heads and seats. We'll be doing some testing, and provided all that testing goes well, then we should be ready to reinstall these on the long block once the block comes back from the machine shop. Now, one thing we will be doing, and we'll cover this more when we get to it, is when we go to reinstall these, we'll obviously be using a bit more brake clean onto a shop rag this time, and we'll wipe the entire mating surface down again prior to installing on the long block, just to remove any oils from our fingers and things of that nature that's going to get on these heads as a result of the work that we still need to do. So with that being said, cut the video a little bit short this time, just like last time. And when we come back, we'll be looking at, again, lapping new valves into our existing seats. But if you have not subscribed already, please consider doing so. If you have, I thank you immensely. We are right on the door of 1,900 subscribers, and I thank each and every one of you for this. Now, to put a little bit of disclaimer out there, is this the best process in the world to do this? I freely admit no. If you've got the extra cash to spend, by all means, probably the best course of action to do these is to drop them off at the machine shop, let them, basically chemical dip the heads and get every little square inch of dirt and grime and all those other items off. I think it turns out well doing this procedure, saves a little bit of money in the long run. Don't get me wrong, if we discover something wrong when we go to seat the valves in, we'll take them to the machine shop and let them take care of the valve work if we find that we had to put new valve seats or anything in its place. Now, just to show you, there is some staining still on the head. This truck came from an area that has that orange-red type clay soil, but you can see that it did get rid of a large portion of the dirt, grease, and grime that had built up on the outside of these heads. You can now at least grab them without coming back with a handful of grit and grease. But like I said, is it the best process in the world? No, I fully admit it's not, but as you can see, it does turn out pretty good. But again, that's no substitute for proper cleaning a proper machine shop. Just want to throw it out there. But that being said, I'll let you go, and I'll bring you back for the next one. Thank you much. Bye.